Hello, friends, and welcome to Worldbuild with us, the podcast where we create fantastical worlds with help from you, our listeners. My name is Rob Hilford. I'm here with my co-hosts Daniel Quinn and Courtney Staples. On today's episode, we have a brand new prompt coming in from a brand new listener, Tucker. I'm going to tell you right now that this feels like a targeted attack towards me and my person. I'm just going to read the prompt right now. It is Land of a Thousand Dwarves. Imagine a Tolkien-esque fantasy world, but a catastrophe has caused all other races to die out, only leaving dwarves. The world could be a weird post-apocalyptic version of Middle-earth, or a different world entirely, but as long as there are only dwarves left. So Tucker, again, in some states and in some countries, this is certainly considered some kind of assault. But remember that if you want us to build your world, we will do anything, as this prompt will provide. Just go to our website, worldbuildwithus.com. You can submit a prompt there, and we will build it live on air. If you want to follow us on social media, you can go to our Twitter @Let'sWorldBuild, or you can come join our community on Discord, where we chat about how terrible dwarves are quite often. And if you're feeling particularly generous, you can always give us money over on Patreon. So let's get right into the episode. Who wants to start us off with their tenet of Dwarf World?
I could get us going.
All right, Courtney, what do you got for us today?
All right, so mine has to do with how this apocalypse catastrophe happened in the first place.
Ooh, okay.
And I was actually watching Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers yesterday because it's a great movie and wanted to kind of get in the mood for this prompt. And,
yep.
And seeing Mount Doom in the background, it was like, oh, like what about some like gigantic volcanic explosion along the lines of the Yellowstone caldera?
Yeah.
Which is this super volcano in Yellowstone that if it were to erupt, and thankfully there's like no chance of that happening, but if it were to erupt, it would basically like destroy the United States. So I figure something along that scale of like a giant volcano in this fantasy land, just something either maybe gets tossed into it that creates some sort of explosion, or there's like a magic user who creates an eruption. But I thought that would be interesting.
So we have the Giga volcano that destroys all of the other races on the planet. That's what
just
I'm
like
hearing.
wipes out the surface, basically.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's no collusion here, but your tenet actually maps very well with mine, and I want to get mine out now. We can discuss both at once. My first tenet was the dwarves are directly responsible for the other races dying out.
That does really work well, actually.
Yeah, doesn't it?
Wow.
So we can now discuss what the dwarves did to make this mega volcano erupt.
I think they dug too greedily and too deep.
I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah.
See, I always like the idea that the dwarves are just kind of spiteful, but how does digging too far into a volcano make it erupt? That's the question for me, because to me, wouldn't that just mean that like you're dwarf fortressing the magma veins into yourself? Because
I have a feeling that the volcano isn't all that it seems. It isn't a normal volcano.
Okay, so what are you implying here, Daniel? I'm very interested about this.
Like for it to just, I mean, you know, a volcano will do a massive amount of damage to an ecosystem, but we're talking fantasy land, right? So this volcano must have something really powerful in it, and they're digging in there, like really blew that up and eradicated entire races, except for theirs. So either the dwarves have a way of surviving this kind of cataclysm that the other races don't, or like, I don't know, like they may have something to do with, you know, having an understanding of how that power works.
Ooh, what if it was like some like ancient dragon egg in the volcano that kind of cracked open when they triggered the eruption, and so now there's like this enormous dragon also flying around the surface, scorching everything.
And it just killed everything.
Yeah.
Okay, I can certainly see that happening. We've now got the WoW expansion Cataclysm, which I'm kind of okay with here. especially if it means that the dwarves are like dragon worshippers in a way. Like that might be a cool like angle to have for them. Like maybe the mythology around it is they dig deep into the earth so they can find dragon eggs, and they just so happen to find this one, which is like the world ender, you know, like it's the end boss of all end bosses, you know.
So it's like, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
So it's like it's interpreted as like the volcano going off, but really it's the dragon awakening and destroying everything, and in addition to the volcano.
I was going to say, why not both? You know, like,
definitely.
Why not the massive cataclysm be a combination of, you know, like, do you guys
like a lava volcano? It pops out of the volcano.
Yeah.
A lava dragon, rather.
And lava volcano. Do you guys know about the year without a summer?
Yeah.
So for those of you who might not know, the year without a summer is the year where Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein, and it's written. There's a whole story behind it, but it's in part because a volcano erupted, which cooled down and like the earth, so it was basically just not hot. There was so much volcanic ash and clouds that blocked out the sun that it was just cool for the entire summer. Read about that story, because her writing Frankenstein is actually a really interesting story in and of itself. There's way more sex and queer stories in it than you would imagine. It's a really cool story. I would recommend looking it up. Anyway, I think that we can have something that is like, we can take that, right? Where, oh, well, it was just cool in Europe for a summer, and then like make that like, oh no, this killed plant life or something like that. You know, like really go over the top with it.
Yeah, like kind of turns the surface of the world into the road.
Oh,
yeah. Where it's just like a gray, desolate, like ash is covering everything, so nothing can grow.
Yeah, and well, do we have to go as dark as the road? Because
no, I think we should keep it a little less horrifically depressing.
I was going to say I would prefer not to look into any stew pots if we can certainly help it.
Well, we have some leeway to go dark because it is a post-apocalypse.
Of course. Well, now it's a post-apocalyptic world, yes. So Daniel, why don't you steer us in a direction and we'll see what you say. What's your first tenet?
I had written down that the dwarves are facing extinction themselves, but as more and more of them die off, they individually become more powerful.
Oh, okay. That's fun. So what about their physiology, or what about the magic that they use, if they use magic at all, allows them to become more powerful, and in what way?
I mean, I guess we would need to understand more about the dwarves themselves to begin with.
Well, here's what I'm thinking, right? I'm going to combine a bunch of concepts here, and I want you to see if it works for you. Dwarves are known primarily for their greed, or in a large part due to their greed, correct? What if the magic that they use works similarly? And so, the magic source is in and of itself greedy. So the less people that use it, they become more powerful. They're essentially powered by greed. And this is deeply inspired by Jeff Johns' run on Green Lantern and the Greed Corps. There is a single member of the Greed Corps in the beginning of the story and everything, and they have the power of all of the Green Lanterns put together. It's this incredible, massive power, and it's because they're driven by greed. Can we combine that, and then can we also maybe look to the dragon as well? So maybe we can combine all these concepts together, and maybe the dragon is bestowing favor onto the dwarves for releasing it. And because it is also covetous itself, the less dwarves there are, the more each of them gain power and favor from the dragon.
Can we substitute greed with nobility? And I ask that only because I'm thinking back to like Lord of the Rings dwarves, who tend to be kind of lonely and noble, honestly, in the sense that they're always looking back to a time that was great, and they've been like made lesser than. Only because like we've seen, we see greedy dwarves a lot. I'm sure there's greed is part of it for them.
Well, Tolkien started that whole trend. I mean, like Courtney said, they dug too deep and too greedily. Like that was part of who they are. So you're saying that we kind of move away,
maybe that digging has changed their attitude because of this disaster.
Sure, I can see something like that. So take that idea and run with it, Daniel. What do we want to see? What's the concept we want to run with?
So I'm trying to take what you just said and like put in nobility instead. So although what you described like makes more sense mechanically, like it's easy, it's like it makes it work in terms of reducing one thing and then the other thing becomes more powerful. So I'm trying to think, how do we switch that without them being noble? Okay. I mean, maybe it is still the case. The greed functions that way, but they're not happy about it.
What if the greed exists, but it's more of like a physical thing in that something about the wealth that they hoard gives them strength, or maybe they consume like metals and gemstones, and maybe that's even why they also revere dragons, because dragons are hoarding all this treasure.
That's not a bad idea.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, maybe what you said is the case, but I just want to say, like, maybe they're not happy about that fact. Like, they're not gung-ho about it. Like, they wish there was a time before they woke this dragon up and they didn't have to do all this stuff.
Well, if we take the same concept on an emotional spectrum and kind of like kick it down the road a little bit, we can also take that same concept and maybe look at it from grief. Maybe as more and more of these dwarves die off, the burden of being the last of the dwarves becomes heavier and heavier. And so they become more powerful as more and more of them die.
That's what I'm trying to go for. I like that.
Yeah. I feel like we can certainly do that.
Because I could like picture even like, a dwarf king lonely in his hall. He has all of this metals and stuff he's hoarded around himself, and he just regrets it all,
Yes.
Even though he's really powerful.
Yeah, I think I can probably run with that a little bit more. Like, I think that we can take the basic concept, push it to its extreme, turn it about 90 degrees, and then we see grief. And then, that's perfect. Yeah, I think that we can certainly do that for sure. I'm going to go ahead and kick out my second tenet because, again, no collusion here, but it kind of works with everything that we're kind of going with. My second tenet is the dwarves refuse to leave their mountain homes, so the world above is left to the beasts, essentially. And that might be
to the dragon.
It might be the dragon, or it might be just like complete overgrown nature type thing. Like it might be a gray landscape, like Courtney implied with the road and everything like that. Or that could be, or we could see like, like that's the first age and the second age is, like a great vernal bloom of some kind, but I'm open to ideas here or suggestions.
So again, no collusion, but my second tenet was also about like the state of the surface. And I was thinking that it would be full of ghosts of everybody who died.
Yes. And I'm totally okay with that.
Like extremely dangerous and just very eerie and haunting and bizarre. And I think there's also an opportunity to bring in like Ents from Lord of the Rings and have like these kind of half dead trees that are really pissed off at everything.
Undead Ents.
Yeah. Pretty much.
Can we maybe go a little bit further and maybe kind of twist it a little bit? Maybe the ghosts are able to possess the Ents. So it's like a dryad situation, but because they're ghosts, it's like they also like wither the tree and make them these horrible like gray twisted bowed monstrosities instead.
Picturing those Game of Thrones trees.
Oh, the ones with like the faces.
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, sure, we can do that too. The tree of the old gods, right?
Yeah. Or in the game Valheim, if any of you have played it, it's kind of like a open world survivalish thing. But there's a swamp ecosystem where the trees have these like weird kind of green pustules on them. I could see that being like the ghosts living inside of them.
Oh, so like it's like a cancer, like a spiritual cancer of some kind.
Yes. Also, is it one dragon or is it multiple dragons?
That's a good question.
I feel like this one would be like some sort of mega dragon.
Okay.
But maybe there are other like smaller dragons around, but this is like the cataclysm level dragon.
I like the idea that there's a clutch of eggs that they find. Like, I think that that's kind of an interesting idea, because now you have political intrigue with the dragons that are on the earth. Like, hey, they have to now carve out territory, and now you have multiple entities that you can have to deal with, stuff like that. I think there's
Are they all
something to
Godzilla
that.
sized?
Bigger, I would say.
Okay.
Enormous, yeah.
They're all mega Godzillas.
Well, actually, which Godzilla? Because it really depends on the movie that you're talking about.
I don't know, like some obscenely huge.
Like I'm thinking like Shin Godzilla size, maybe. So they're massive, and maybe there's like 5 of them or 4 of them or something like that, and then we can, like their collective eruption is as big as a singular cataclysmic monster. And then, because again, now you get like Dragon Wars where they got to fight out the territory and be number 1 and stuff like that. Like, come on. So again, Courtney and I seemingly really wrote our tenets together here, and yet not at all, but I'm still very excited. So Daniel, why don't you take us home? Your final tenet. What's your final tenet going to be?
It reads, there exists an artifact deep within the earth that contains the essence of all races, extinct and extant.
Okay, so they have the opportunity to bring them all back, is what you're offering with this, right?
Possibly, yes.
Okay, that's not a bad thought. I like that idea a lot. Does it include dwarves?
It says extinct and extant, so both.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm just curious, because if we're going with like this grief as a power flow or a power system, would that mean that they bring their dwarves back and then so they're all looking for this thing? And if so, like, why wouldn't they all be digging for this at the same time if they know that it exists?
I'm guessing it has the concept of the essence of a race, so maybe like it wouldn't bring back the dead. It would make it possible for the race to continue to exist.
So this is almost like the Antarctica like seed vault type thing.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Like, it's like not a way of resurrecting people, but it's a way of like, I don't know, restoring the very race itself. So like you can have new life.
Okay. So I would love to explore that a little bit more.
I have no idea what it is other than that.
All right, cool. So let's talk about that then. What's the process that's involved here once they find this vault and they find the essence of other sentient races within? Like, how do you bring them back?
I wonder what it looks like. Is it like a boat? Is it an object? Is it?
Well, we could make it like really on the nose and have them be like literal seeds, but like seeds of light, or something like that. I'm open to ideas.
Maybe it should mirror in some way the dragons.
So make them eggs?
Yeah, or something like that.
Yeah.
Because like it was in the volcano, so I don't know.
Yeah, I can see like a nest of eggs buried deep in the center of the earth.
Like, what's the opposite of the dragon?
St. George?
Paladin.
I mean...
Opposite in what way?
Conceptually, I guess. Like a dragon is greed, destruction, eternity, enormousness,
So you want something small with a short lifespan, no scales, and brings life.
I mean, is it like like to go with your St. George concept, is it like ornaments? Is it something you don? Is it, I don't know. Is it a matter of does the dragon contain it? Like, do you have to wear this armor and defeat the dragon to
That's
crack
exactly
it open?
what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Or like the
Get it
heat
out?
from the dragon's flame somehow activates it.
The concept, to think about it, right? What brings about the end of all life is the dragon. Maybe this thing, maybe the cataclysm is just part of it, but maybe it's like ambiently drawing life from these things, and it's like kind of collecting all of their soul essences within the dragon's body in some way.
Oh, because it's killed them all, so it has it has them in it. It is
again, so we can make the dragon greed, and you can have it be so like the original dwarves who uncovered the clutch of eggs were like cultists who thought they wanted greed until they actually got it.
Right.
And so that's why you see their magic shift from greed to grief. You know,
I mean,
like,
definitely it's got to be at armor, I think, and a weapon, because think about dwarves and think about the epic fantasy. Like someone's gonna find this thing, however it's found, put it on, and now you've got, like in Lord of the Rings, when the old king is restored and he's determined to, undo what's been done, right? And he has to go and face the dragon.
Of course. And do we want it to be, so my question becomes, do we want it to be armor, or do we want to make it a special type of metal that the dwarves have to
they forge? Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because if we're bringing in dwarves, then we have to make sure that we get that,
it's like the metal to forge.
What if each race has a different type of metal associated with it, and there are different veins that they have to like melt down and combine together?
Yeah, there's different veins in the volcano that's left deposits of it that they get the metals.
So each piece of their armor represents a different race of fantastical peoples, and then of course to really bring in the Captain Planet aspect of it. The weapon that you need to slay the dragon is actually all of them combined into an alloy that can pierce the dragon. Into
a massive ass warhammer.
See, why warhammer and not something that like can pierce the heart and release
because
the soul?
It's always a sword, and dwarves love big, heavy objects that are blunt.
They do. Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine running in there with this little 4-foot dude? He's got this warhammer that's like 8 feet long, and he just smacks the dragon in the head with it, and the dragon's head cracks open. Like
I love that concept. I wanted to go with like maybe an axe.
Or maybe it's an axe with a warhammer, but the both ends.
You know what? We can compromise. We can come together. Look, if I can sit here and talk about dwarves without throwing up in my mouth the entire episode, I'm willing to be diplomatic here. We can make it on one end there's a warhammer, on the other there's an axe.
Love it.
There we go.
Yes, it represents both the I don't know, I can't even find a metaphor for that. It's just it's quintessentially dwarf-like.
Sure, I'm okay with this and what's happening right now.
And there's a shield, obviously,
of course,
and a helmet.
Exactly, and they all represent different races that have died out and stuff like that. Yes,
and I think too, this warrior, he knows he has to sacrifice himself. Because by killing this dragon, he's going to open up the possibility that these races will come back in the end. Like we'll start to grow again.
And we'll probably be pissed at the dwarves. Let's be real.
Oh,
if they learn the truth, that is,
But maybe the dwarves would just hide the truth.
That's true.
Kind of
That's
very.
I mean, it's possible too, depending on how you want to play with the lore, that maybe the dwarves, because they're always digging for stuff, they found it, but the other races like colluded with them, like the greedy ones from each race, to remove it, and so they're all responsible.
Yeah.
So the question now becomes: why is it the dwarves survived? Is it just because of their mountain homes, or is it because they have more collusion with the dragon than the others?
I mean, initially I was picturing it as just the fact that they're dwelling in the earth. So they're
underground people. That
layer of protection separating them. But I'm sure there could be like a more magical element to it too.
I have a feeling it might be just as simple as like they know how to live in the earth, and they're they can endure the best. Because we did say that they're also facing extinction. It's just happening slower for them.
That's true. Yeah. So let's think about this. Can we make it like a magical pact that means that they're slowly dying off? And so or rather, because they broke the pact that kept them safe initially, that they have been dying off, like they've lost the thing that kept them safe to begin with.
Like they chose to go to the surface?
No, actually, because my tenant directly says that they refuse to leave their mountain homes. Oh, right. So it's more a matter of like, they make a decision to fight against the dragons, and so that means that wait a minute, hold on, I'm sorry, I'm thinking about different things now. Can we have a dragon for each race as well?
Sure.
So that means that you've got to now hunt down 4 or 5 of them, and so it's like we've got we've got humans on our side now, but they're all children, so that's not helpful. Like something like that anyway.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's not just one set of because they're forging these things. Maybe it's multiple sets of weapons, so like there's several dwarves that have to go out,
Mhm.
and each one will fall.
I kind of like the idea as well that this is an intergenerational tale as well.
Hmm.
So maybe there's a dwarf who is able to take down a dragon, right?
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah, and then so like hundreds of years go by between each dragon's death until like the last one is going to be the most powerful, most conniving, most manipulative, and all that stuff.
Mhm.
Let's see if we can bring it back around and be like, okay, are the dwarves themselves, maybe they I'm still trying to like connect some dots here for me that for some reason just aren't sitting right. I'm trying to figuring out why they're not sitting right and like what I can do to like make myself feel better about it. Because in my mind, I see the dwarves as like a supplicant race. Like they are the ones who are like, look, we're willing to give up our freedoms, and then and then they rebel, and then the first time they figure out how to kill the dragon is the dwarves freeing themselves. You give them a heroic bent, you give them like a freedom fighter bent, something like that. Does that sit right with the rest of you, or is that like me just kind of dealing with my own shit here?
What do you mean by like how do you, because they have to leave their holds to go and face the dragon?
Oh, wait a minute. You just gave me an idea. The dwarves can't leave their homes. And so when they leave to fight the dragon, they're leading to certain death. Yeah, certain
right.
death.
Like maybe that begins their extinction.
Yes. Yeah.
Mhm.
So it's like this kind of, and maybe you send out multiple heroes and being like, hopefully one of them will kill a dragon, right? And we will never know because we can't surface and figure out what's going on up there.
I mean, it also speaks to their nature, right? So if they know magically they're safe as long as they stay in their strongholds, but they know the world has been destroyed by these dragons, that they're partly responsible for having awakened, or totally responsible. The fact that they have to decide, like one of them will have to decide against their grief, but also towards their courage as a decision, that they need to go out and break this magical pact and begin their extinction to end these dragons. Like that's kind of a cool epic moment because now you have this king saying, no, you're all cowards. I'll go myself and take the forged armor and I will slay the first dragon. And so then it begins their extinction.
Yeah, no, I'm totally down with that. Like I like the heroic angle that we can get there,
And then his son, decides, I won't let that be a death in vain. And then he goes to the next dragon, and it goes on for the generations as they start to die off.
Right. And that, that's not bad.
And they become more powerful, as they're getting older and as they're dying off, because that the function of their greed works that way, even though they regret it.
Well, it's and that's where you see that shift from greed to grief,
Exactly.
right? Like each dwarf holds the death of the previous hero deeper and stronger than the last. And so it's like when I say grief, it also means legacy in a lot of ways as well.
And the dragon's becoming more powerful because its function works the same way, right? Like as each race is killed, it gets more powerful, just like they're getting more powerful as they become lesser in number. There's
also an aspect to it where these dragons, when they first arrived, were probably children and like were just kind of thrashing about because they're like, it's like a really overexcited puppy that's too big for its own good.
Are they? So were there like a ton of them, and then they all kind of ate each other until they got like gigantic, and now towards the end. Oh, damn it. Now towards the end. Sorry, I'll say it again. Was there like a whole lot of them, like little ones in the beginning, like a storm of dragons, and then they all kind of eat each other and get bigger and bigger until we end up with like 5 giant ass ones?
That could be cool.
I'm okay with that. Yeah. And then of course you can have like cool and now of course each dragon has their own personality. You can even have like a pair of them that are twins that are like, we're sticking together, like the fuck the rest of you guys, we're like, this is our domain. There's 2 of them as opposed to just a singular one. There's a lot, I'm saying there's a lot you can do there in terms of personality.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Never thought I'd say this, but yeah, that sounds pretty cool.
I think dwarves, like especially Tolkien dwarves, like they always have this epic sensibility to them, just in how he defines them. So I think that they're always a perfect fit for this sort of thing.
Sure. I'm I'm going to bite my tongue and give you that one, Daniel. Yeah.
And I'm not a fan of dwarves, so I'm just saying
That's
this
true.
based on what I know from Tolkien primarily, because I really don't care
It's
about
true.
dwarves.
It's true. I really feel like it's the more derivative like fantasy that kind of ruins dwarves for me.
Yeah, I feel like that too.
know?
Like there's not depth to them. I feel like in what I've seen in other video games. I mean, granted, like even in Warcraft, they're fun. Like they've got a strong flavor to them, but they lack that, I don't know, emotional depth that I remember from Lord of the Rings in particular.
I promise you I will not go into my full spiel again, but I'm at least going to bring up the point of order that I always have a problem with dwarves, which is why not just make them humans? Because to me, there's nothing about dwarves that tells me that they are a different species or a different race, other than like they're shorter, they have stocky beards, and they live longer. But like realistically, I feel like you could just make that a human and like not lose any of the dwarvenness. Like you call them dwarves and still have, you know what I mean? Like, does that make sense? Or am I just like being bitter about this?
No,
I've always felt like I agree with you that like you don't want to have knockoff derivative races that are just an aspect of humanity that's been taken to an extreme. I just feel like sometimes the purpose of a fantasy race it's actually to be physically different. Like there's nothing thematically about it. Like for example, the dragon people that they have in D&D, right?
Dragonborn.
Yeah,
it's an aesthetic choice to be a dragon.
It's really an aesthetic choice.
In the 4th edition book, if you
Oh
want
my
to look
God,
like a dragon, play a dragon.
Right, like I think part of the draw, which I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Like part of the draw, at least in a game, is to play something that's physically different than you.
Yes.
But they're really just the same. They're, when it comes to their identity, there's no difference in the humanity of it, right? They're still a human sort of thing.
Right.
So to that extent, it's not like a disagreement with what you're arguing. It's just like that's some reason why they might do that.
Right. It's justification. It's and I am not going to be the one to argue with aesthetics. Like if your argument to me is like, I want to play this race because I think it looks cool.
Right.
I can't take that away from you. I can't take that. I can argue with that. It's like, no, I mean, I like to wear darker clothes because I think look better in them. Some people like pastels. Like it's a matter of flavoring and choice. You know what I mean? Like, it's aesthetic. It's pure aesthetic.
When it comes to a story, though, right, like that's when, like you're saying, you want the alternate race. It still has to be some form of humanity because we can't identify narratively with something that isn't in some way human, right?
Right.
But it should tell us something new, right? So, like at least in Lord of the Rings, the dwarves, even though they're kind of like short humans, there's a whole history to them and there's a whole emotional tangent to them that makes them different than humanity, at least in their concerns. But they are human in the end. Right, like these are all humanoid races. That's why they're races rather than species. Like
sure, yeah. Okay, I'm glad that we can at least get that out there. So now I won't have to bring it up ever again. I'm like I can just be a little bitter. Not like Bittrex bitter, but like just a little bitterness. So I mean,
even think of like Star Trek races, right? Like, they're technically aliens, right? But the reality is they're tangents of humanity, and otherwise we wouldn't be able to identify with them. Like the reason why we like Spock is because we can see our own need for rationality and an inability to control our emotions in him. Same thing with like the Klingons, right? We see the potential for like emotional range there, and nobility and rage, right?
I just kind of realized that I feel like a lot of fantasy races are just like what if versions of humanity.
That's what they are.
Like Klingons are just like what if humans but warrior culture.
Exactly. That's all they are.
Right.
And then they get more expanded from there depending on how the story goes,
and I think that's oftentimes like what I take umbrage with a lot of the time because it's like, to me, I'd rather explore the humanity of humans in that way. It's like you can make a culture that mimics that, no problem, call them humans, and like that to me I think is more interesting and honest and true compared to the hacky bullshit that bad fantasy and bad sci-fi writers do when it's like human butt,
Well, it has to do with genre, right? Like if I want to tell a sci-fi story, I can do it with all humans, but there's some expectations and I'm going to explore some fantastical concepts,
Yes. Yeah. I get it. Again, I'm not even angry. I'm not even bitter a little bit. But I feel like my point has been made. So I feel like we can move on a little bit. Before we get into building our world anchor, is there anything else about this world that we really need to explore?
One thing that I was thinking, since we talked about how the dwarves don't really want to leave their home or can't without, dying. What if that also then leads them to create like much broader networks of caves, like underground roads, essentially, so that they can get closer to the dragons without having to surface too early, basically.
Yeah, and then there's like
that.
kind of natural boundaries that are like, okay, you can go here and no further because this is like dragon country, like for real. Yeah. I like that concept a lot. I mean, I think we can kind of keep a lot of the essence of dwarves to this, Yeah. One thing I do have in mind, right, is that this seems like one big, broad, epic fantasy story, and the conflict is fairly apparent. It's like hero versus dragons. Is there a secondary antagonist that we can throw in there? Because I feel like there's some missed opportunities with like a secondary antagonist potentially.
Oh, maybe the dragons have, this kind of violates the tenet, but maybe there are one or two remaining of one of the races that have been kept alive somehow and they're evil in service of the dragons.
Well, we can make them new, or they can be like, maybe it's those weird ghost infected ents that we were talking about, or something along those lines.
Put it together. So like maybe there is like an elf who remains, who's a ghost elf that's part of the tree that serves not necessarily the dragons, but has its own intentions.
Yes. See, that's something that I can get behind, like that's something that I'm more interested in. It's basically like a ghost necromancer that is. Yeah. Also, necromancer ents, like, come on, that's a cool concept. We should definitely run with that.
I bet then that faction, like, it's undead versions of the gone races. Like, there's a necromancer, but maybe he brings others back that way. And so that's why you get to explore what were the races in the past, but they're distorted versions.
And we get revenants of some kind, where they're not necessarily evil, but they're certainly undead, Alternatively, we can take a Tolkien and, like a big theme within those books was, kind of like industry versus nature. And we can take that a step even further and have it be so maybe they're straight up automata or something akin to like golems or elementals or something like that. And maybe that's what the dragons can use. Maybe these are myrmidons of elementals or something like that. These are just concepts I'm throwing out here,
The dragons could have even crafted golems essentially out of like the metals and scrap ruins of the cities that they destroyed.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah, like they have the flame and they can meld things together. And they have magic.
So these are like terracotta warriors, but like gold maybe?
Yeah. Oh, I like that. Yeah.
Maybe it's the gold that's been melted down in the previous cities.
Yeah, no, I'm certainly okay with this. I like the idea of like, and mind you, I don't see them as like perfect like simulacra. Part of me sees them as like half melted, barely humanoid looking monstrosities in some cases.
Yeah, like the dragons are just kind of dicking around and also like being assholes about it. And I could picture a scenario where like they make one of these golems out of like an old throne and imbue the spirit of the king into it. And they're like, oh yeah, guess what? You got to live with this now. So enjoy it for the rest of eternity.
Why not go a step further and like have them like pour molten metals over corpses and like, or maybe even still living bodies. And that's what serves them, like
that's horrifying.
Yeah, it sure is.
That's cool. Because then what you have is when the dwarf king comes or his descendants with his army, they're facing that, they have to fight through that to get to the dragons so they can fight it one-on-one.
Yeah, because like I feel like Okay, I walked through a desolate landscape. I knocked on the dragon's door. Now it's time for a one-on-one fight. Like, no, come on, man. This is an epic fantasy. We got to have like minions to burn through, and there's got to be stakes, like there's got to be stuff besides just the dragon.
Yeah. And they're also pushing those forces into their holes,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And it also makes those minions very sympathetic if they were forced into these roles and they are no doubt suffering horribly. Yeah. And are also angry at both the dragons and the dwarves.
There we go. I like that a lot. I like that concept for sure. All right. Mission successful. We've made dwarves that I don't hate, or at least the setting we're in dwarves that I can tolerate. Let's not go too far. So I think we're ready to move on to the world building anchor. How does everyone feel about that?
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. Okay, so we're now going to roll some dice, and we're going to figure out something within the world that is incredibly important, and we're going to have to figure out what that is. So we're going to roll some dice and figure out what the theme and what we're focusing on is. We're going to start with what we're focusing on, and that thing is going to be... Well, we kind of just did this almost. A villain. All right. The theme surrounding that villain is going to be treachery. Interesting. So we have a villain whose theme is treachery. I think this basically writes itself because to me, this says a dwarf who has sold out his kindred in order to gain more power. Yeah. Maybe the dragons aren't the one who are creating these molten minions, but rather it is a singular dwarf enthralled to the dragons. And so he is like, all right, yeah, I'll be a corrupt, evil, horrible asshole and give you these minions. Sure. As long as I'm by your side rather than in your path,
Yeah. And maybe his reasoning is like, if he's the only dwarf left, he's essentially a god at that point with the amount of power that he would wield.
Yeah, maybe.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Maybe he thinks that he would be able to match one of the dragons in power, and then maybe he's so arrogant that he imagines that he can rule over them rather than the opposite. Maybe
that's
he's
hoping.
Enough, yeah. Is there anything else that we want to drag out of him? Like maybe we can make him a little bit more complex than that. Because I feel like that's boom, quick, cut and dry. But I feel like there's something that we can add to make him a little bit more interesting. How do we make him sympathetic?
Maybe he was the brother of the king who originally kind of caused all of this. And he was sort of always second in line. And maybe that's why he devoted his life to blacksmithing and kind of metallurgy and stuff like that.
And the dark magics.
Yeah.
Well, the family line is perfect because that's why there would be such tension when they finally face him.
Yeah, and then there's a little bit of jealousy going on as well.
Yeah.
Is that sympathetic though? Because that just to me justifies his actions in a way.
I think it makes him sympathetic because if it'll be the first king or whoever faces him first has to slay his brother, as much as you might hate him for all the evil things he's done, he's still his brother, right?
I suppose you're kind of approaching it from the angle of the king, right? That's where the sympathy lies. I'm looking at it from what happens if the first king doesn't do it, that type of thing.
What if he is the one who was responsible for crafting all of that equipment out of the different races' metal veins in the first place? And I don't know, maybe something to do with that.
See, I think that brings up an important question is where in the timeline are we as of right now? Is this they need to still go and find all of that equipment? Is it after that? Where are we in terms, where do we want to focus on narratively? What's the most interesting aspect that we can focus on right now? Where do we want to kind of pin ourselves in terms of a timeline?
I think part of the issue is that because we have these massive gulfs of time between each slaying, you are losing some of the tension, right?
Mm-hmm.
So while that can still be the case, if you want the story to focus on one, then you might want all of these characters to be related to that one group. Otherwise, for example, this guy, either he exists across all these generations, right, that are slaying all these dragons, and so he'll only be related to one of the sets of characters in the beginning, and then the other ones don't really know or care, or it's like one generation and one giant ass battle and one epic army,
Yeah, I mean, one giant ass epic battle is definitely more like Lord of the Rings style fantasy, I think.
In that case, then, like you're saying, like this metallurgist could have been the one to forge the original artifacts, and for whatever reason he's been seduced to betray them. So now the heroes that face the dragons, they also face him and his armies, and there's you can have words at that point because they know each other.
Maybe it was something having to do with the actual crafting and melting down of those metals, that something in the metals themselves sort of leached into him, like almost like a radiation type thing, and kind of corrupted his mind over time. So it was like a slow sort of downfall that led him to making those golem things.
That's kind of that's an interesting point. I think there's also something to be said where there's an interesting plot point that I think we can kind of pick up, where maybe the smith that we're talking about here starts smithing these things together, gets corrupted for whatever reason, and leaves a lot of it half finished. So now another plot point, another like point of tension that is created is finding another dwarf who can do the same thing that the smith did. And like that in and of itself is kind of like a mini quest or of some kind that needs to be resolved.
That's almost like a Chosen One style plot line where you're trying to find like the perfect blacksmith to finish off the creations.
Almost.
You can look at this as the apprentice, so like, which would be deviating from the Chosen One in that it seems like this smith is kind of like a Saruman in terms of where he fits in the story. And Saruman got corrupted and he joined the dark side, basically, right? So it seems like you're looking for a young apprentice who needs to be taught how to do this, and he has to learn from whatever remnants are left of the metallurgist's knowledge to forge the armor. And so his story would be learning how to do that. So it's not like you have to be born with this. The person has to actually learn it.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. That's kind of what I had in mind, is like finding someone who is willing and capable of learning all of the secrets of the original smith.
And he maybe part of it to do like a Luke Skywalker sort of deal. Like maybe part of it is he has to venture to the Dragon Hills and pretends to apprentice under the metallurgist to get some of that final knowledge, and then escape before he kills him.
Or we could even have it so each subsequent generation isn't going out to fight a dragon. It's going out to find clues and like resources that you can learn to like craft the rest of the armor that you need. It's not like the king is going out like, all right, I've got the stuff, I'm going to go fight the dragon. It's like, I've got to go find page 7 of this lost manuscript so we can have a scrap of hope that we can fight this thing eventually. Because then I think that is in a lot of ways even more heroic, because it's not like it's a last stand. It's I'm fighting for the hope of a last stand.
And it kind of brings like an interesting exploration aspect in if you were to run this as a campaign. So rather than only focusing on fighting the dragons, you're focusing on exploring ruined cities and searching like essentially destroyed civilizations for clues and things like that.
Yeah, there we go. And then maybe it's not like all knowledge that the master smith has and has hoarded to himself, but maybe it's all like techniques and information that he's learned through travel, through understanding other races and stuff like that. And so there's so maybe there's like this aspect to it where you can go to another dead city or a dead civilization and learn something from them even though they're not there. And on top of that, we can even bring in the ghosts that Courtney had brought up earlier. And maybe so it's like you need the smith, the ghost of this dead smith, to teach you this one last thing. There's all these different elements that I think we can throw in there when we add in like the additional elements here.
So you brought up the aspect of like the sort of original blacksmith traveling and learning these techniques, and what if that is what led to his madness? Like there's something about like we talked about how dwarves being on the surface, something about that kind of kills them over time. Like what if them going to the surface like leads them to become mad over time, and
dwarf madness,
right?
Yes,
yeah, like seeing the sky and being out in the open air is like, oh my god, what is going on?
And then we can basically mirror the journey of like Frodo and stuff like that, but with like a dwarf who's like, I've just got to go and find this and bring it back, you know? Yeah. And then of course you can have someone who's been out and it's like, you've never seen the sky before, not like I have, you know? It's
right.
Like, like you can have the Bilbo of it where it's like, he's already kind of crazy because he's been hoarding this knowledge, or he's already gone and seen the sun, you know, like stuff like that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm excited. This is a fun setting for me. I'm very much enjoying myself here, y'all. I think we're at a good stopping place, though, and I think that we now get to potentially fuck everything up with adding a twist. I don't know if we can do anime here. I can't see that happening. So the twist for next episode is going to be there really are monsters under the bed. I have no idea how we're going to do that. That's up to future me. So that's going to do it for this episode of World Build with Us. Remember that if you want us to build your world, you can always go to our website, worldbuildwithus.com, and you can submit a prompt by clicking the little radial button. Alternatively, you want to follow us on social media. We're on Twitter at Let's World Build. You can always join our Discord by clicking the link in the description for the episode. Or if you're feeling particularly generous, you can always give us money over on Patreon. That'll do it for us. And remember that we love you very much. And we're going to get through this together until next week.